Hey there YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. Been a while since we took a look at Roger from Mudfossil University. The last time was when he was going on about electrons. Now that's not his typical fare. Mostly, he's all about pretending that rocks are fossils. And today, we're going to be covering some of that, mostly because I need a bit of a break from the relentless dishonest of creationists, and I figured that I'd take a look at some good old-fashioned stupidity instead. I don't think Roger even knows enough about science to lie about it. Today, we're going to learn how volcanoes are alive, how phosphorus is actually aluminum and silicon, and a bunch of other cool stuff that's definitely not true. Also, don't be scared. Roger has done a face reveal, and so before he starts poking his computer screen with a feather, he shows up in front of the camera, face and all. Additionally, I did some work to cancel out the background noise and his breath noises. I can't guarantee that I got all the extra noise and such, so if there are some inhales or whatever left in his audio, my apologies. There are also a few places where Roger takes extraordinarily long pauses or just repeats himself, and I've cut most of these out. Anyway, here he is.
Good morning, my friends. It's Roger again.
Good morning, Roger. I can somewhat surprisingly say that at least right now, it is good to see you.
This is over the top, way over the top.
That, in my opinion, summarizes basically all of Mudfossil U. But okay?
This goes back to my early days in Alaska.
One of the few places on Earth less habitable than the majority of Canada.
And there is a Mount Spur in Alaska. And when I tell you the story behind it, it's going to blow your mind. I had no idea it was there when I was there. The only reason I knew about Mount Spur is because I typed in a search to search for a study on what volcanoes produce as, the aggregates that come out of it. What is it? What is magma? What's it made out of? What's its characteristics? What's the chemistry?
I've got to say, I approve of the impulse to check with sources when trying to learn something new. Roger is on the right track with this so far. If you don't know something, the first thing you should do is to see if someone else does. Now, I also want to point out that does not mean that you should DM me on social media to ask something that you could learn yourself by checking one of the top 3 results on Google when you search for it. Please don't do that.
And the first thing that popped up was Mount Spur. I'm not kidding, I swear, and it blew my mind.
Mount Spur is a stratovolcano that is the tallest peak in the Aleutian Range. I'm not surprised it came up in a search for volcanoes, especially for someone like Roger, who, as a former Alaskan, probably has a search history with a fair bit of Alaska stuff in it.
And the reason they did a lot of studies there was because they have nuclear missile sites up there that are not too far from that thing. And the crazy thing is, I was the one that was up there servicing these sites, and I didn't even know Mount Spur was, I never had heard the name.
Roger has long claimed some kind of work history with nuclear stuff, but near as I can tell, he's always vague about it. He uses this as some kind of credential, but he never says what kind of work he did. Was he a janitor with a security clearance? An electrician? A plumber? I don't know. I've done work on classified military installations in various parts of the country, but guess what? I'm not an expert at anything that went on there, because my job was to install some new electrical busing in an electrical distribution center. I suspect that the reason we never hear Roger's actual job title is that it would be unimpressive as a claim to expertise in physics.
I was on the other side of Cook Inlet. There's 2 sides to Cook Inlet, and the side where Mount Spur is, where there was one missile site there. I serviced the other missile sites on the other side. I'm not giving away any secrets anymore. We couldn't talk about it back then.
Unless Roger has received information declassifying what was going on there, which I find unlikely, he probably is giving some information away that he shouldn't. But whatever, I'm not a federal prosecutor, and frankly I think the US government could do with a few more leaks. So I will let Roger blab away. It's not like I'm the one spilling the need-to-know beans.
Because it was, this was 1968 when Vietnam was going on. Anyway.
Yes, one of the many wars in which the United States committed horrible war crimes, like the My Lai massacre, in which U.S. forces murdered 300 to 500 civilians. Of course, that's just one of many crimes against humanity perpetrated by my former employer, the United States Department of Defense. But hey, we're not here for that. Let's see what else Roger is talking about.
It's a crazy mixed up story, but I'm going to try to explain to you what happened and what Mount Spur really is.
It's a stratovolcano.
This is Mount Spur right there. It's a volcano.
That's true.
This is really amazing. Wait till you hear this.
That was his cut there. There was no transition, just a hard cut to a new angle and a new screen with Roger behind the camera like we're used to. I think I actually prefer Roger in front of the camera. I don't know why, but I find him more endearing when I can see the enthusiasm, however misplaced, on his face. He clearly loves what he's doing, even if it's some of the stupidest stuff that a human has ever done.
Feldspar. Well, what is feldspar?
Feldspar is a group of minerals mostly united by the presence of aluminum, silicon, and oxygen, with varying other elements also bonded to them, such as potassium, sodium, or calcium. It's extremely common on Earth and is found in both igneous and metamorphic rock quite commonly.
It's the most abundant mineral in almost all crust on the igneous rocks. So what is the crust?
The crust is the outermost layer of Earth's lithosphere. It's the thing you walk on when you go outside. It's where all the mines humans have ever mined are. It's mostly composed of granite and basalt, with granite forming the bedrock of the continents and basalt the bedrock of the oceans. Below it is the upper mantle.
That's the crust on this is igneous rock. That's the crust.
I'm not going to contest that that rock is igneous, although I can't confirm that from here, but I will say that that rock is part of the crust. It's not the whole crust, and the crust is not just composed of igneous rock, but also metamorphic and sedimentary rock.
All right, this is the crust on this one too. This is the crust on this one. These are all feldspars.
First, they may contain or be primarily made of feldspar, but how does Roger know that? It's quite likely, but has he done chemical tests? Has he identified the species of rock he's holding? I don't know. I doubt that he has, since he's more likely to say that he has tested a rock for blood and DNA than for actual normal things like hardness or chemical composition. But then, maybe he actually does have some lab report finding these rocks are mostly feldspar.
That's the crust on this one too.
So now I'm suspecting that he simply means the surface of these rocks is the crust. But that's not what we mean when we say the crust of the Earth. The whole of those rocks are part of the crust of the Earth, for the simple fact that they're above the mantle. Any surface deposits on them are not properly termed a crust, but a patina. A patina on a rock can be composed of oxides of the minerals the rock is made of, or deposits from the environment which have adhered to it. Not all rocks even have a patina, as not all environments or rocks are conducive to its formation. But that's the best case scenario for what Roger might mean by crust, besides that he simply means outside.
All feldspars. And I'm going to tell you what the feldspar chemistry is, because it's membranes. That's the crust. The crust is the membranes.
A membrane is a thin sheet of tissue or a layer of a cell forming a barrier between an exterior and interior space. By analogy, you could say that the crust of the Earth is itself a membrane, although not in a literal sense. But individual rocks like he's holding up have nothing even analogous to a membrane. But I'm guessing he's not going to drop this, and we're about to get a barely comprehensible deep dive into how rocks are actually membranes, because this is the man who's never met a rock he didn't think was a body fossil.
The membranes were made out of phospholipids, which is the P, phospho, and they degrade down to aluminum silicates.
Phospholipids, as the name implies, are fats that contain the element phosphorus. Now, I'll say it is true that silicon and aluminum are 1 and 2 atomic numbers lower than phosphorus, respectively. But elements don't simply degrade and move to lower atomic numbers. Beryllium doesn't just decay into helium and then hydrogen. In fact, hydrogen more often fuses into the latter two inside stars. Now, most isotopes of phosphorus are indeed radioactive, and phosphorus 28, 27, 29, and 30 can decay into silicon via beta plus decay, and 26, 27, and 28 can decay into aluminum via the same mechanism. This happens at the longest with a half-life of less than 150 seconds. This means that from a biological perspective, these versions of phosphorus simply don't survive long enough to form a significant part of the phospholipids such that cell membranes could turn into measurable amounts of aluminum or silicon. Indeed, only phosphorus 31 is stable, and with the longest-lived phosphorus isotope, phosphorus 33, having a half-life of a bit over 25 days, phosphorus 31 is basically the only isotope of phosphorus that matters for biology.
That's what feldspar is, aluminum silicates.
That's true, it is. Which means that since it's not made of phosphorus-containing fats, it's not got anything to do with cell membranes.
All of these are aluminum silicates, and it's listen to this. Feldspar, the most abundant mineral. It's everywhere on these crusts. Everywhere on these crusts. It says those without feldspar being rarities. If you have a rock that doesn't have any feldspar on it, you got a rarity.
Yep, that's true. Aluminum and silicon are some of the most abundant elements in Earth's crust. And we all know that Earth has no particular paucity of oxygen, and those are the core components of feldspars, so this is no surprise.
Feldspars define better than any other mineral group the 3 stages in evolution of the igneous rocks. The magmatic growth, where they're all melted, then the subsolidious transformation, and then the deuteritic alternation stages.
I am quite confident that Roger has no clue what magmatic growth, subsolidus transformation, or deuteric alteration are. I myself have only a very rudimentary understanding of them, but in relatively simple terms, the magmatic growth is the initial collection of the molecules which will go on to form the final rock into areas where crystal growth will begin. Subsolidus transformation is the further growth of what will eventually be crystals in the final igneous rock, while the rock is still too hot to be considered a solid. But it is too cool to easily flow, and deuteric alteration are the final changes to the crystals as the rock cools further to solidify into a new igneous formation. Each of these is a complex process and far beyond both my knowledge and the scope of the video.
Well, I'm not saying there is no volcanic rocks. Obviously, you can see them bubbling up and all that. You can see them. Where they are, yeah.
But they're made out of cell membranes for some reason.
I'm not disputing that, but I'm not saying, trust me, that is not volcanic. That is not volcanic.
You may be surprised to learn this, but I do not trust Roger on this. Those rocks look volcanic, what with the volcanic gas bubbles forming a Swiss cheese texture on the first one, and the visible larger scale crystals in the second one. I'm no geologist, and I would be willing to say that the second one might be a metamorphic rock that was igneous, but clearly both of those rocks started as magma of some type.
This is a guy's lung, and so is this. And this one here has been DNA tested and CAT scanned and everything else.
Roger is apparently claiming that he had that rock CAT scanned and tested for DNA. Does he plan to show us the results of this, confirming that it is in fact a hollow sac filled with villi and that it has DNA in it? No, of course not. This is, if anything, even more meaningless than when Carl Baugh has his random rocks that look like things CAT scanned. Because at least he shows us the images generated that don't at all say what he says they do. Roger, though, I think, might actually be delusional. I'm not sure which is more likely or which is worse.
All right, there is no 3 stages of evolution here.
He said, without demonstrating that either rock is what he says it is, or that he knows what the stages of the evolution of igneous rock are, never mind that this rock somehow defies them.
It's all feldspar.
First, I doubt very much that all of this is feldspar. There are probably other minerals in there.
Yeah, it's everywhere. On literally every rock I have has feldspar on it.
That actually seems plausible given the ubiquity of feldspar. Even many sedimentary rocks are feldspathic. On the other hand, I doubt he has actually done anything to verify this.
Virtually every single one. Like, that's a bone.
Really? A bone of what? What specific bone? We don't find out, because remember, Roger is so far into his own rabbit hole that he doesn't even need things to look like things to conclude that they are those things. Although, as we'll see, he's still totally going to say that anything that looks like something else is that something else. But hey, he says that's basalt and not feldspar, so let's look into this. Basalt is a kind of extrusive igneous rock. It's what forms the oceanic crust on Earth, and it is also the main constituent of the surface of the moon. A bit more than half of it is silicon dioxide, which is to say quartz. But oops, on average, the second most common mineral in there, after that, is indeed a form of feldspar. So if Roger is holding up basalt, it's almost certainly got plenty of feldspar. This isn't super related to anything that Roger is saying, but columnar basalt is something that happens when basalt is allowed to cool relatively slowly, and it tends to form hexagonal columns, such as are seen in the Giant's Causeway in Ireland. It's an unbelievably cool phenomenon, in my opinion, and one of the most interesting kinds of igneous formation I'm aware of.
But that's all feldspar, all of that.
Okay, first it's basalt and not feldspar, and now it's all feldspar? Roger can't even keep his story internally consistent. But no, if it's basalt, it's not all feldspar. It's less than half feldspar by weight. That's part of what makes it basalt. Just a reminder, Roger has called so many universities to show them his wonderful insights into nature that he is officially to be hung up on at a number of institutions. He is basically a serial harasser of academics.
And inside, they form basalts and other things.
Well, this betrays a basic ignorance of the difference between a rock and a mineral. Rocks are composed of minerals, and minerals are bits of rock with a single chemical formula. For example, granite is composed of minerals such as quartz, feldspar, and mica. A rock can be made of a single mineral, but most are not.
But the feldspar is the phospholipid membranes.
Except that feldspar doesn't have phosphorus, isn't made of fat molecules, and there's no known chemical process to turn phosphorus into aluminum silicates, which is what feldspars are made of.
There's a membrane around everything in your body. Every single thing that's divided from something else has a membrane on it.
That's basically true, but I fail to see any connection between that and the aluminum silicate minerals in volcanic material. And remember, Roger has said that he believes volcanoes are real because he can see them spew lava that then cools into rock. So is this lava alive and made of intact phospholipids? That seems unlikely since phospholipids start to break down at around 230 degrees Celsius, and lava tends to be more like 700 to 1200 degrees Celsius. So at the very least, lava can't cool with still coherent phospholipid bilayers, which is how phospholipids form membranes. It's also notable that phospholipids only form bilayer membranes when in an aqueous solution, since the polar nature of the water is what forces the polar and non-polar ends of the phospholipid to self-attract on one side and attract to the water on the other. And since lava is generally melted silicates, not water, we shouldn't expect membranes to form in the first place, even assuming the temperatures weren't too high.
And every one of those membranes is made out of phospholipids, phosphorus.
Then it's not feldspar or any of the other constituents of basalt. So Roger just doesn't understand the basics of chemistry, particle physics, biology, or geology. Is there a science he kind of understands the rudiments of? If so, so far I have not found it.
A bilipid layer of phosphorus type stuff.
What the actual is phosphorus type stuff? That right there is just Roger hand-waving away the fact that he doesn't know what phospholipids even are. I really am curious how he comes to this conclusion. Like, what connection in his mind happened to say that obviously, stable phosphorus, the only kind you're likely to find in any quantity in a living thing, can degrade into silicon or aluminum to then become feldspar. And so the fact that most igneous rocks have feldspar crystals throughout them must mean that they have a membrane covering their outside, and that it's somehow also still a phospholipid membrane, but it's on the outside while the feldspar crystals are distributed throughout. This is really just staring into the maw of Azathoth.
And when it got all boiled off, the phosphorus degraded into aluminum silicates, which is these coatings on all these things. That's what protected them and kept them from rotting away.
Okay, so if you have a phospholipid membrane, you won't rot. I don't get how that works. All cells have a phospholipid membrane, which means any organism that dies would be so protected, and nothing should ever rot. We should be up to our eyeballs in the preserved corpses of the past. And I don't mean fossils. I mean still biological squishy tissue.
So the chemistry's not all that hard to understand if you pay a little attention to it.
Except that this isn't chemistry. Like at all. Chemical interactions are mediated by electrons. Atoms can take electrons or share electrons at the most basic level. Chemical interactions assume that the nuclei of atoms are immutable, and it's the nuclei that determine which element an atom belongs to. Nuclear reactions, on the other hand, do occur in the nucleus and involve things like spontaneous decay of protons, the expulsion of neutrons, electrons, positrons, or alpha particles from the nuclei, etc. Now, these will have knock-on chemical effects, but fundamentally they are not chemical reactions. It's pretty simple. If the nucleus didn't change in the reaction, but where the electrons are did, it's a chemical reaction. If the nucleus changed, it's a nuclear reaction.
All right, so don't forget, they said it was two main categories of these igneous rocks, which are made of fire.
While it is true that igneous comes from the Latin igni, meaning fire, which is also seen in words like ignite, igneous rocks are not made of fire. They are made of molten minerals, which then cool into solid rock. Fire is not the only source of heat, and the fact that the moon, which has essentially no atmosphere, never mind enough free oxygen to allow a fire, is made almost entirely out of igneous rock, should be a clue that this has nothing to do with fire. Also, I would say that the moon is entirely composed of igneous rock, but I think there are also almost certainly some metamorphic rocks which started out as igneous rocks.
Extrusive, that just sort of bubbles out, and intrusive, which is locked down inside the surface of the earth. Extrusive rocks are formed on the surface of the earth from lava flows.
That's true.
It's the magma that has emerged from underground. Intrusive rocks are formed from magma that cools and solidifies within the crust. So they would say this right here is whatever, intrusive, and out here is extrusive.
Roger was so close there. But no, the entire thing is either intrusive or extrusive. Let's take some examples. Granite and basalt are probably the best known igneous rocks. Granite is intrusive the whole way through, and if the same magma erupts onto the surface, then the lava it forms cools not into granite, but rhyolite, which is extrusive the whole way through. Similarly, basalt is extrusive, but if the same magma that forms it cools without coming to the surface, gabbro is formed instead. Gabbro is intrusive the whole way through. Rocks are, as a whole, intrusive or extrusive. Intrusive rocks tend to have cooled much more slowly and so tend to have large crystal sizes, whereas extrusive rocks tend to have much smaller crystals, something you can see in the examples I've given of the same magma forming intrusive or extrusive rocks. So that dark rock he is holding up with large-scale crystals is probably intrusive, and even the surface of it is intrusive. It's like Roger is trying to get literally everything wrong at every step of the way.
It's just, they don't understand what these rocks are made of. They're biological. I'm sorry, my friends.
They're not even organic, never mind biological. Organic compounds definitionally contain carbon. You know what neither silicates nor feldspars contain? That's right, carbon. But you know what phospholipids contain? That's right, lots of carbon. So even if we pretend that stable phosphorus is just going to turn into lighter elements for no reason, what happened to all the carbon? Shouldn't these rocks be mostly graphite or something? Did the carbon leach out? If so, how? And where did it go?
That's what we live in, is a biological world.
There certainly is a lot of biology going on Earth. I'm just so far not convinced it's happening in volcanoes.
Now we're getting down to the whole mix of the thing. As you know, I always keep saying you have to understand a little bit about chemistry. Not a lot, but just enough.
Something which Roger manifestly does not.
And biology to understand how the body functions and how everything works in sync with everything else. It's very important to understand that.
Given Roger's understanding of particle physics, geology, and chemistry, I can't help but be supremely skeptical that he has any understanding of biology at all.
And then, the geology, what is really, what's on the Earth.
One of the things not on Earth are a bunch of rocks with extrusive exteriors and intrusive interiors.
Okay, this is where it has to all come together. You got to know a little bit about all the different sciences.
Okay, I know at least a bit about most sciences, and more than a bit about some. I think I'm well equipped for this. If what Roger is about to say makes sense, then I'm sure I will be able to follow.
And why do I say that? Because this right here is what's called the fluid lipid bilayer cross-section, entirely made up of phospholipid. Chlorine.
Phosphatidylcholine. You can't just ignore this if you're talking about the chemistry of phospholipids. Maybe you remember from high school being asked to balance chemical equations. This is called stoichiometry. In chemical reactions, atoms don't just appear or disappear. They all need to be accounted for. Further, you have to know what atoms are even there in the first place. And Roger said chlorine, but it is in fact choline, which contains literally no chlorine. There isn't a single atom or ion of chlorine in phosphatidylcholine. There's a lot of carbon, some hydrogen, a bit of oxygen, nitrogen, and a single lonely phosphorus atom. That means that overall the vast majority of a phospholipid is not phosphorus, and so to indicate that any rock actually originated from the phosphorus in phosphatidylcholines requires one to account for the significantly greater amounts of carbon. And yet, we do not see this abundance of carbon. Indeed, there is far more silicon and aluminum than carbon in the crust of the Earth, meaning that from a chemical standpoint, even if we were to accept that phosphorus all decays into silicon and aluminum, which again, it doesn't, then chemistry still precludes phospholipids being the major source of these elements.
Well, what does that mean?
I feel like I've already explained a lot, but okay, let's see what Roger thinks it means.
These are phospholipid bilayers. What does phospho mean? It means phosphorus. Phosphorus, right there, you see it?
Yes, we've been looking at the chart most of the video. I see it. And yes, that's why the phospho morpheme is in phospholipid. But I'm wondering if he's going to address the lipid morpheme in that word.
They coat here, and in between is a fluid-filled highway and membrane and all that stuff.
No, generally transport of chemicals happens across the membrane. Hence why there are a whole slew of transmembrane proteins that facilitate the intake of important chemicals and the expulsion of cellular waste. Transporting things through the middle of the membrane would just move it around the outside of the cell, and what good is that? There's already a whole set of transport proteins and cytoskeletal elements for intracellular transport.
And in there is really your immune system, basically.
No, not at all. So the first line of defense in your immune system is primarily mechanical. Your skin is a barrier to most infectious agents. That's why if you touch something infectious and wash your hands before doing something like eating, touching your nose, or touching your eyes, the chances of you being infected are far lower. So yeah, wash your hands. The next line of defense is chemical. Many areas of your body that may come into contact with things from the outside have chemical means to deter infection, such as antimicrobial chemicals on your skin or stomach acid. But when someone says immune system, what they normally mean are the lymphocytes, neutrophils, and macrophages, all different kinds of white blood cells. And the thing you'll note about them is that they are themselves whole cells, not simply some subcellular structure as Roger has stated.
But what we want to talk about is the phosphorus.
Yeah, all that carbon is inconvenient. Let's ignore it. That's how you do real science.
These coat every single thing in your body. That's a bone.
No, they don't. And two, no, it's not. Phospholipid bilayer membranes coat every single cell, but they do not coat extracellular material such as the extracellular matrix of epithelial tissue or the extracellular collagen fibers that help give skin elasticity.
All of that stuff is coated with basically a membrane. There's a membrane on everything in your body. Your liver, your lungs, your heart, they all have a membrane around it to separate it from something else. It's just the way it works.
Yes, things like the pleural sac around each lung, the pericardium around the heart, and the meninges of the brain are indeed membranes. As an example, the outer pericardium is made of fibrous tissue that is composed of cells embedded in an extracellular matrix of collagen, hence why it is called the fibrous pericardium. While the cells are indeed surrounded by cell membranes made of phospholipids, the whole of this layer of the pericardium is not, because the extracellular proteins lack this membrane. So, in order to say that all your membranes are phospholipid membranes, Roger has to be completely ignorant of fairly basic biology. Now, I feel like just a few minutes ago, that's exactly what I predicted. Roger is just as good at biology as he is at particle physics and geology. Is anyone surprised?
These membranes turn into feldspar.
Then where does the carbon go? By weight, these membranes are almost all carbon. Feldspar doesn't have a single bit of carbon in it. And of course, this is ignoring the fact that no non-stable isotope of phosphorus that can decay into aluminum or silicon could realistically last long enough to be frequently incorporated into a phospholipid used in an actual organism, meaning that the phosphorus in these membranes physically cannot turn into aluminum or silicon. But then again, maybe Roger doesn't believe in half-lives.
Every one of these rocks, can you see all those?
I see 5 rocks. If that's all of them, then I can see all of them. If it's not, then no, I can't see all of them. I have no idea how I'm supposed to know if there are off-camera rocks. I can only see what's in frame.
I mean, virtually every rock, I think I showed to you, it's it's a rarity to find a rock that is not coated with feldspar. Feldspar is the membrane, it's the collagen, it's the rubbery stuff that coats everything and separates it from the rest of the world.
Okay, let's take a look at the diagnostic physical properties of feldspar and see if it sounds like a rubbery membrane. Well, first it has perfect cleavage in 2 orthogonal planes because of its crystal structure, which makes it brittle, not rubbery, and 2 means that it is not a membrane, since those don't have cleavage planes at all. It has a Mohs hardness of 6 to 6.5, which is too hard. Let's try to estimate the Mohs hardness of such membranes, which are a lot of what is in your skin, so we'll use skin as our proxy. Now we know that talc is softer than skin, which is why it's used as baby powder, and that stuff has a Mohs hardness of 1. But Mohs hardness above 2 can't be scratched by fingernails. Now skin can be scratched by fingernails, as I'm sure you know, which means that skin has a Mohs hardness between 1 and 2, so let's just say 1.5 as our rough estimate. Since skin is actually one of the more scratch-resistant parts of your body, I'm being very generous in saying that 1.5 is our estimate for the Mohs hardness of a phospholipid bilayer membrane. So feldspar is far harder than a membrane, once again making me wonder how it's supposed to be a rubbery soft membrane. Chemically, all feldspar is 4 aluminum silicate pairs bonded to 8 oxygens and 1 atom of usually potassium, sodium, or calcium. Even if we assume that Roger is right and the phosphorus can account for the aluminum silicate, and we just grant him that the oxygen in the phospholipids can account for the oxygen in feldspar, where do the other atoms come from? And where did the carbon, which is the bulk of phospholipids, go?
And in this flood...
Wait, what flood? This is the first I'm hearing of a flood.
It protected the organs and so forth, but it appears that all of the fleshy stuff boiled off in the waters. It was supposed to be almost just boiling waters everywhere. That's what it... some people survived, obviously, to tell the tale.
Some people survived a flesh-melting, boiling flood? How? That seems like an XK class scenario to me.
So they were like high up in the mountains and caves or somewhere, I don't know.
I think you're going to need to do better than a mountain or a cave or perhaps even a mountain cave to get past a flesh-melting, boiling flood water.
That I can't tell you. But there was information about this passed on.
Is this where flood legends come from, according to Roger? Are we getting a peek into the Roger versus mythic history?
And I believe that information is valid, so...
Sorry, but Roger believing something isn't exactly a good reason to take it seriously.
I'm going to go with that.
Going with crazy conjecture for which there is no positive evidence and mountains of contrary evidence seems like the Roger way.
But this is the membranes. Virtually everything, all rocks, every rock that you can pick up basically has this membrane around it.
Could we have some reason to think that's true beyond Roger not knowing what intrusive and extrusive igneous rocks are? No? We can't? Well, that's unfortunate.
So, and it's from this phospholipids, which breaks down to aluminum silicates, which is the feldspar. All feldspar is made of aluminum silicates.
You know what I'd say here. I'm not going to repeat it again.
Before we get off this, I just want you to know that every single cell in your body, every cell has its own membrane around it, even red blood cells.
Yeah, that's how cells work. Without a membrane, they'd just be a bunch of organic chemicals dissolving into whatever exists outside of what was once a cell.
And bacteria have a membrane around it that is very unique.
Well, bacteria have a cell wall over the cell membrane, but they still have a phospholipid bilayer with transmembrane proteins all over the place.
It keeps it from getting dried out.
This is true. Cell membranes are semi-permeable and tend to allow water to come in more easily than it can leave the cell, which is indeed a way to keep the internal environment of the cell sufficiently aqueous. Water is the solvent of life, and virtually all biochemical processes involve water in some way or another.
But anyway, these are all phospholipids, and they surround these fluid-filled passageways in here, and that's how you can float around, and your body can move around, and other things move against it. And it's sort of a layer, it's a sheet that keeps you separated from everything else.
No, the liquid is on either side of the membrane, because the part facing out is hydrophilic, and the parts pointing in are hydrophobic, so they tend to exclude water, which is rather the point. The only liquid that can reasonably exist in the middle of a bilayer would have to be a non-polar liquid, such as fat. But those are big molecules, and generally wouldn't physically fit in that space. So sorry, but Roger is getting almost everything wrong about phospholipid membranes, except that they have phosphorus.
Otherwise, you'd be, breaking through this layer is invasion, and it's the cancer and everything else is invasion of these membranes. Membranes are supposed to separate everything from everything else. And if you get broken through that membrane, they call that cancer.
Yeah, but that's not what cancer is. Cancer is cells that don't know when to stop reproducing. You do not need to break through the membranes of your other cells, and they themselves will die if you burst their membranes. The thing that makes cancer so insidious is that it's not an invasion from the outside. It is fundamentally a corruption from the inside. The reason it is so hard to kill cancer is that the cancer is part of the patient, and so anything that kills it is liable to also kill other parts of the patient. That's why, for example, most cancer treatments have such horrible side effects.
And it causes all kinds of problems. But these are all biological membranes. And they're all made of this phospholipids. And again, the phospho is the thing I'm talking about, is this because it breaks down in the boiling waters from phosphorus down to aluminum silicates, feldspar.
In case you're wondering, there is no temperature at which phosphorus will break down into aluminum, silicon, or both. You can heat it to the point that you can strip all the electrons off the nucleus, but it still won't make a stable phosphorus nucleus decay.
Well, don't forget, they said it's a rarity to find a rock that's not coated with a crust of aluminum silicates.
That's not how feldspars work. They're crystals inside rocks, and yes, dotting the outside too. I mean, just look at the Google result Roger has on screen. Quote, the Feldspar group of minerals is by far the most abundant group of minerals in Earth's crust, making up about 50% of all rocks. That doesn't mean that Feldspar makes a crust on each individual rock. It means that of the rocks on Earth that are above the mantle, about 50% of them contain or are largely made up of Feldspar minerals. This isn't even about not understanding science. This is just basic English language and reading comprehension.
Feldspar is the name given to a group of naturally occurring aluminum silicate minerals containing varying amounts of potassium, sodium, calcium, and or lithium, which are all parts of your body.
I mean, they're all elements that are found in your body, but calling them parts of your body is a very strange way to phrase that. But hey, you know what the main part of your body is after water? Carbon. You're basically a bag of water held together by fancy carbon and some accessories. So where does Roger think the carbon is going? I don't know. He isn't even thinking about it.
The Feldspar group of minerals is by far the most abundant group of minerals in the Earth's crust, making up 50% of all rocks. It doesn't make up all rocks, it makes up the coating of all rocks.
This is fascinating. First, Roger confuses what is meant by crust, thinking that the crust of the Earth simply means the exterior of any given rock on Earth, rather than being the uppermost layer of the lithosphere. Then he decided, based on what I do not know, that phosphorus can simply decay into aluminum silicates, even though it really can't, at least not the phosphorus you're likely to find in living things. Now, having decided that all of this fits neatly into his basic assumption that essentially all rocks are actually petrified meat, he has circled back to his initial source to disagree with it. This is not a normal thought process. Does he not remember just a little while ago when he was agreeing with this statement? Or at least what he thought it said?
Inside, there's all kinds of different things.
That's true.
One of them being feldspar.
Primarily basalts and limestone, all kind of things. But
well, most basalts contain feldspar, and it's a whole kind of rock on its own. It's not just some mineral that makes up other rocks. Limestone does not tend to include feldspar, as it's mostly the fossilized shells of microbes. Although there are non-biogenic limestones, they're just the minority. So limestone is also a kind of rock, not a mineral that makes up bits of other rock.
On the outside, yes, they're completely crusted with their membrane.
You know what would be fun? If we had some kind of evidence for this. Like, could we see a chemical study indicating a higher concentration of feldspar on the outside of rocks than on the inside? All the rocks Roger is showing us were once physically part of bigger rocks, and have eroded out of them. So do they have breaks in the membrane showing their original outer surface? And can one use this to determine if the rock one has was originally on the exterior or interior of the igneous formation the rock came from? Does this hypothesis have a single bit of evidence, suggest a single avenue for research, or make a single prediction? I don't see any of that.
All right, check this out. This was, I'm not sure what it was, but I'm pretty sure it was some kind of an organ. And again, it had a flat spot down here, and I just smacked it open. I'm kind of rough on this stuff, but I've got so much of it, I can do this all day long.
Oh, cool. This rock actually does have a noticeable exterior crust and a visibly different interior. I have no idea what indicates that it's an organ, but it certainly is an interesting rock. I'd love to know where Roger got it. That's an important part of geology. It allows people to repeat your sample gathering to confirm if what you said about a rock formation is actually true. That kind of thing is also important to paleontology and archaeology. Standard practice in all of those fields is to say exactly where you got your samples from, including a detailed site map and in situ photographs. That's all a big part of the replicability and openness that are the key to science.
This right here is the aluminum silicate crust.
Well, it's certainly a crust, but the very fact that it's not present all over the other rocks Roger is showing means that this phenomenon is not ubiquitous, which is part of his claim. But also, I can't help but notice a total lack of cleavage planes or hard angles, which are typical of the breakage of feldspar crystals. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if that crust had bits of feldspar in it, but calling this a crust of feldspar seems a bit of a stretch. Has Roger done any scratch tests, any chemical analysis? Has he sent it to a real geologist? I highly doubt it.
This is the feldspar, but inside, that's not feldspar.
I don't think either is bulk feldspar.
All right, that's the inside body. This is the membrane. And it's a dense membrane. It's probably a lung because the lungs have a very dense membrane.
Do they? Compared to what? What's the interior of that lung made up of then? Because lungs have air-filled interiors, and when they don't, they tend to collapse. So there shouldn't be some full interior made of rock if you have a petrified lung. I mean, it's obviously not an organ at all, but just about anything like liver or something would probably be a better candidate than lung. Maybe Roger has a thing for lungs. This is the second rock he said is a lung. Maybe it's because lungs are just kind of oblong sacks of tissue. And so it's easy for many rocks to be oblong blocks of minerals, so the shapes are vaguely similar, allowing Roger to use his impressive kook mating cry of "looks like" all day long.
Like this here has a very dense membrane.
How do we even know that that rock is not homogeneous in its composition? Roger doesn't seem to have fractured it, so we can't get a cross-section. For all we know, it has no difference between the exterior and the interior, besides whatever patina it may have accrued from things like sitting outside or being pawed at by a lunatic who thinks that statues are fossils.
And I can prove this, the lungs have them. Hold on one second.
Hold on? Hold on to what?
You see this? This is another lung. Again, died flat flat as a pancake.
Yeah, there's no way for a rock to have a flat surface. It certainly couldn't be from cleavage that left a relatively straight fracture in a larger bunch of rock that was then further eroded, allowing this particular rock to become disassociated from the rock it was once connected to, and leaving it with a flattish surface. And I'm not saying that is exactly what happened. I'm just pointing out that there are a lot of options for producing a rock with a flat side that aren't just all rocks are lungs, actually.
And this is the coating of the lung. They call it pleura.
You know, the pleura ends at the bronchus where it attaches, and the bronchus is itself a tube of stiff cartilage. Where's the bronchial opening in this rock? Or any of the rocks Roger has identified as lungs. The bronchi are the way air gets into the lungs, which is, kind of the thing lungs are for, getting air. So if these are lungs, how did they get air into them? Shouldn't there be a bit of petrified cartilage without all feldspathic membrane around them if what Roger is saying is true? It's almost like, once again, Roger doesn't get biology. In this case, it's basic osteichthyan anatomy. I say that because it seems that clade had lungs ancestrally, and the ones that lack them now, mostly what are commonly called fish, actually turn them into swim bladders.
And it's really like a big rubber bag on a lung. It's very dense.
I can't seem to find a good source on the density of pleural tissue, but since it's mostly going to be collagen with some cells, and collagen is more dense than cells, which are mostly water, we're going to use collagen as a proxy for the whole thing. Now, the density of collagen is not something that just shows up in a table somewhere, but I did find a paper in which Abro et al. Took some rat collagen for experimentation and got density estimates that ended up being about 2 to 4 grams per cubic centimeter. That's 2 to 4 times the density of water. Now, Feldspar has a density of 2.56 grams per cubic centimeter. Interestingly, that's right in line with collagen. But what's the problem? Oh yeah, almost all the weight of collagen is carbon, but Feldspar has no carbon at all. So while sure, the pleural sac is relatively dense, and so is Feldspar, that doesn't do anything at all to support the claim that 1. Cell membranes can decay into Feldspar, 2. The pleural sac is actually made of mostly phospholipids, 3. That the rock he's holding has a crust at all, or 4. That the rock he's holding is a petrified lung.
It's got to do this all day long, or you're dead.
I don't know. I could hold my breath, and some animals can do so for a very long time. But I'm just being nitpicky now. Now that I think of it, though, I guess I'm a professional nitpicker. So in the interest of making this informative and nitpicky, a Cuvier's beaked whale was once recorded holding its breath for 2 hours, 18 minutes. That's some impressive lack of lung work, but also conversely some impressive lung work before and after.
And it has a tab on the top that locks in.
Locks into what? Is that supposed to be the bronchus? Because those come in laterally, not from the top.
And then this strap at the bottom locks it into the body so that it doesn't float around in your body.
But those aren't things real lungs have. Roger is just making up new anatomy on the fly based on what he's seeing in a rock that he has already arbitrarily declared a lung. So the thought process is, gee, this rock looks like a lung to me. Oh, I see it has features that I don't recognize. And then I'll just assume that what I'm seeing is a real thing in real lungs. And no, I will not do anything to check any of these ideas against anything even remotely beginning to resemble reality.
And that's a lung.
No.
Again, flat as a pancake. Now, This one,
Okay, this is a 3D model of lungs made by Sketchfab user Nashalids. One of the things you might notice is that there isn't simply a flat surface. There are separate lobes. The right lung has 3 and the left 2. The bronchi come in laterally. There is no tab at the top of the lungs and no strap at the bottom. What about Roger's rock indicates that it looks like one of these? We can't even tell if it's a left or a right lung. Nothing about Roger's rock actually looks like a lung if you know what a lung looks like. By the way, Nashalids also has a realistic digestive system, kidney, and a heart that's so well detailed and realistic, I actually find it a bit uncomfortable to look at.
again, is all, well, not all eroded, but it's pushed back so we can get a good look at it. And if I put water on there, this would turn nice and red.
Then why isn't he doing it? It would make at least one of his claims true, but also red coloration in rock can simply mean that the rock has a high amount of iron oxide, that is rust. Rust is a common chemical in many rocks.
It still has plenty of blood in it, as this one here does too.
Oh, I forgot. Anything that's red is blood according to Roger. My mistake.
And this was DNA tested.
By whom? When? Where? Can we see the results?
And CAT scan, and it's human.
I see. So this thing that does not look in any way like a human lung was CAT scanned and determined to be a human lung, and it had human DNA in it. But Roger won't show us the results of either test, so we have to take the word of the guy who thought that Mystery Flesh Pit National Park was real, and that during his lifetime, Coca-Cola had released an aphrodisiac flavor made from the sex juice of a giant kaiju monster under Texas that then almost woke up, causing the closure of a national park, and he just didn't remember any of that. Okay, so for the most part, I don't think Roger is a liar like John Sanford, Kent Hovind, Carl Baugh, Andrew Snelling, or Robert Carter. Those guys know better, and they lie. Roger, though, for the most part, seems like he genuinely just does not know how to think. He mistakes his stream of consciousness ramblings full of intrusive thoughts for the source of all truth, and thinks that they are the products of a genius-level intellect. Most people who come across him realize that he's so wrong about everything he says that even bothering to correct him would take so much time, and that they would have to start at such a basic level that it would be a full-time gig lasting at least months to get him straight on any topic. But when he says he had his rocks DNA tested and CAT scanned, I don't know what to think. Obviously, he didn't, or if he did, they came back as just being rocks, and we know that because if they actually came back full of anatomical detail and human DNA, he'd be doing nothing but showing us the results. But does Roger think that he had his rocks DNA tested and that they came back positive for human DNA? Is he delusional? Is he lying? I really don't know. Tell me what you think and why in the comments, because this is one part of Roger that I understand the least.
And I extracted blood right out of this spot where it's dense in blood. I went inside and got it out.
How did he do that? Did he drill a core sample? Did he use a needle? It's like Roger has never heard the famous aphorism, you can't get blood from a stone.
And again, flat as a pancake.
Again, that's a meaningless observation since lungs aren't flat as a pancake.
And it's human.
He alleged without evidence.
So the feldspar is nothing more than the membranes.
I look forward to the paper Roger is about to publish with all of his methods and data. Until then, though, that's just an assertion that has been argued for almost entirely through logical fallacies, most of which were simple non sequiturs.
They think it's, I'm not sure what they think, but they think it's just a big category of rocks, which are just nothing but rock.
No, they know it's a mineral contained in more than 50% of rocks on Earth, and they know this because of things like chemical testing of actual geology samples in actual geology labs, with results published in actual papers with methods, results, and collection fully documented with data tables, sitemaps, charts, and figures.
And they had no meaning. They came from somewhere, from a big bang, or I don't know what they think.
It's right on Roger's screen. They come from lava and magma, which contain aluminum silicates.
I can tell you what, Caesar right here. That's a goose.
You know, it's a popular pastime to look up at clouds and think of what they look like. Roger seems not to realize that the game isn't real life and that finding a rock that superficially looks a bit like a goose isn't the same thing as finding a petrified goose. Where are the feathers? Where's the separation of the upper and lower jaw? Where's the nail at the tip of the bill, a feature characteristic of the family Anatidae, which includes ducks, swans, and geese? Where are the eyes?
Caesar Augustus. You see the feather pattern on his head?
No, I specifically do not.
This is the same material. It's a collagen.
Is he saying that feathers are made of collagen? Because they're not. Feathers are made of phi keratins, which are a subset of beta keratins, which are more complex than alpha keratins that are used to make up mammal fur. And no kind of keratin is the same as collagen.
But it's a membrane. Anything that separates you from the rest of the world or from your other internal organs, because you got kidneys, you got liver, you got your lungs, you got, all of that stuff.
Yes, I do indeed have internal organs. Roger and I are on the same page there.
Is completely different chemistry. It has to be separated.
What does that mean? Different proteins are expressed in different organs? That's true, but the reason for the separation is more about containing infections and preventing mechanical damage than it is about separating the biochemistry of different organs.
So that's what the membranes do, and this is nothing more than a membrane.
I thought it was feathers, and those don't even meet Roger's definition of a membrane. They don't form a sheet around the exterior of a bird. They're filamentous. You can get right to the skin just by brushing them back against the grain, and then you can brush them down again, and they're back to normal.
And this again, he's flat too on one side because...
Come on, the other side doesn't even have a matching eye spot. How does Roger not notice this?
Again, he died in a flood.
Wait, so the flatness is supposed to indicate that the animal died in a flood? How does that work? Animals don't just flatten because they're drowned, and if they're buried and flattened by sediment, then it's not just one side that's flattened. They're compressed as much as their bones will allow. So, what's going on here? How does any of this work?
Now, inside, you can see, if you angle it correctly, you can see where the throat was here.
That looks entirely homogeneous to me. I can't see any internal structure that could correspond to the esophagus, vertebrae, cervical ribs, ligaments, cervical air sacs, or anything else I'd expect in a bird neck.
All right, and that was where his artery was right there.
Oh, that little nick is the artery, eh? Do you think Roger knows that the blood supply, both artery and vein, in birds runs along the ventral and not the dorsal side of the cervical vertebrae? Meaning that if he's looking for an artery, it should be towards the throat and not the back of the neck? I don't think he knows that either.
So this is what happened.
I see. So the evidence of the mud flood is that Roger doesn't know anything about bird anatomy. I mean, that was basically David Menton's argument that birds aren't dinosaurs. Maybe being badly misinformed about how birds work, but pretending you know all about them, is just a common thing in pseudoscience wacko world.
So now we need to start thinking about this as a reality, and it maybe means nothing to you, but I think it means a lot to a lot of people. It means something to me.
It would mean more to me if it made any sense. If Roger could show us any of his work, and if he didn't just badly botch bird anatomy.
Because I'm starting to look at the ancient texts of what was written.
Maybe he should look at some modern biology and geology texts.
About things that we just laughed at. And I did too. I laughed at them.
I don't even know what things he means. I'm not aware of an ancient text that says the world was covered in a mud flood that preserved geese as rocks that don't even look like geese except in the most superficial ways.
It's crazy stuff.
Agreed.
But now it's not so crazy anymore.
Disagreed. If anything, Roger made it more crazy. But okay, time to take a break. Let's come back again later. I think I'm done with Roger's insanity for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit like and tell me in the comments. If you didn't, feel free to hit dislike and tell me what the problem was in the comments. Either way, please remember to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you're always notified when I have more content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Benthoven, Phil Rivara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Denny5252, Elaran Teller, Horseflesh, Ian Chan, Kelvin Brostek Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Monkey They Them, Robert Carpenter, Sphincter of Doom, Volus, Eta V, and Strawberry Vein. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.